So there I was, deep in a YouTube rabbit hole, when I stumbled upon the most delightfully odd creation, a Star Wars trailer reimagined in the quirky, pastel-hued style of Wes Anderson by way of artificial intelligence. As a movie poster designer and fan of both Star Wars and Wes Anderson's films, I was inspired and thought, why not give it a shot myself? Therefore, I set out on a creative adventure to turn the iconic 1977 Star Wars poster, which was illustrated by legendary British artist Tom Chantrell, into a whimsical Wes Anderson masterpiece. In this video, I'll show you how I used Midjourney and Photoshop to create this reimagined movie poster. All right, let's get this creative journey started. The first thing I needed to do was head on over to Midjourney and start pulling a ton of different selects, looking for shots similar to what was used on that original Star Wars poster. So it's a lot of back and forth and then using a bunch of different prompts to finally get what I wanted, which was cool Wes Anderson style photography and images. And let me rewind just a bit, because one of the first things I did was create the building block, which is all of the information about the movie. So rather than boring you with typography, I went ahead and used a sans serif similar to what's used in some of the Wes Anderson posters, and then created that Star Wars logo with a different font. As soon as I had that created, I dropped all of my Midjourney AI images into Photoshop, and then once in Photoshop I needed to mask them all out, which is actually a very tedious task. So I used a little bit of the select subject tool as well as the pen tool until I finally had most of my images masked out.
God damn.
Next, what I did is drop in that original poster and then just started placing all of the masked images over it until I kind of got something similar. And then once you have it fairly close, you can start doing all the tweaking that you need to tweak. Then with Han Solo, I had to do a lot of touch up using the puppet warp tool. So I wanted his feet to line up similar to the poster, so there's a little bit more tweakage involved. If you're not familiar with the puppet warp tool,
Gotta make a note of that one. Might come in handy someday.
and then I used that same puppet warp tool on Princess Leia to kind of mess with the angle of her rifle and then a little bit of her clothing. And then once again, same thing with our main character, Luke Skywalker. Now, I have to admit, I had a hard time working with Darth Vader. I wanted to get a pose similar to the original Star Wars poster, but it just wasn't happening. So I kind of was like, well, let's just switch it up a little bit, maybe get a profile and see what happens. I noticed that this image had a good hand with the lightsaber, so I could definitely use that no matter what. And then I went ahead and masked out the entire image and dropped it back into Photoshop and just started messing around with it a little more and trying to see if I could get it to work. Then I just used the rectangle tool to create some lightsaber effects. And right now they're just basically a white rectangle, and then later on I actually turn them into more realistic lightsabers or blasters. The one thing I wanted to do on this poster is lengthen the dress on Princess Leia so that there's less information behind Luke Skywalker. It just helps with the composition. Then to fix that finger on the hand, what I did is brought out the lasso tool and then made myself a selection and then used the clone stamp tool to just kind of mimic the other fingers on the hand. And then I totally forgot this beret might be a nice little touch to the poster, so I found one in AI already, went back in, masked it out, and put it on C-3PO. And to kind of get it to work a little better, I just used the warp tool and then warped it around his head. And then, of course, added a little bit of shadow by just using the brush tool. And then slowly but surely, I add in the rest of the spaceships and get them really similar to the original poster. Now, one of the fun parts is adding that explosion, which I pulled from another AI image and basically used the pen tool to mask it out and then drop it back into my poster file. Oh yeah, go check out some of our alternative movie posters at postergrind.com. Now let's go ahead and add some exploding rocks. To do that, double click on the smart object, make a copy, and then hit Command L to bring up your levels. With your levels, go ahead and increase the contrast. Then we're going to use the select color range and use your dropper to select one of the rocks on the object, and that will basically create an ugly mask. Once your mask is created, go ahead and apply the layer mask. Now you can bring out your lasso tool and lasso around the rocks until you have everything that you want to use in your explosion. Then hit Command J, and that's going to create a copy, and now we can copy and paste it back into the poster and then clean it up as needed. What's your favorite Star Wars movie or series? If you drop your favorite in the comments, maybe I'll go ahead and make an alternative movie poster on whichever one is mentioned the most. I also wanted to add some stars into the background, and I used the same exact technique that I used to get the exploding rocks, so you can do the same thing as well. Alright, so I wasn't digging the Darth Vader pose with the profile selection, so I went back into Midjourney and spent another, 30 minutes trying to get a similar pose to the original, and I finally found one. This one's gonna work, so I masked it out, dropped it back in, and now we have an awesome Darth Vader to work with. Now, with a little bit more puppet warp, I was able to drag his arm down a little bit, mask him out even more, and get a proper Darth Vader in this poster. Now, from here on out, most of the hard and tedious stuff has been completed, so it's time to do a lot of color correction. I'm starting with Vader. I want to have him more of a blue tone, and same thing with the Death Star, so I'm just messing around with the colors. To do that, you can use a little bit of color balance and a little bit of hue saturation to get the color that you want. And after a little bit of color correction, I went back in and fixed some little problems using some puppet warp on Han Solo's legs, cleaned up other areas of the poster doing the same exact thing. Just minor fixes. Then I wanted to add a little bit of shadow on the Death Star to give it a little bit more punch. And one thing that was missing was a little bit of atmosphere, so I brought in some clouds, and once I had those masked out, I was able to mask them even further by using the brush tool and a mask on that layer, and I just went back and forth with my brush tool, masking them out so that they would blend in with the background. Once that was finished, I wanted to add that painterly aura around Darth Vader, and I just used kind of like an oil brush that I had in my brush selection kit and just started painting around Vader. Then I wanted to add a little bit of lighting to the spaceships, make them a little brighter, especially the one coming out of the explosion, and to use that I would just use curves. Going in, painting where necessary, increasing the curves. Sometimes I'll use the exposure or levels. All right, let's knock out the lightsaber and laser beams. All we're going to want to do is convert your rectangles into a smart object. Add a little bit of Gaussian blur. Once you have that, go ahead and double click into your layer styles. We're going to go to outer glow. And then once you're in outer glow, go ahead and change the colors and mess around with the settings, the size, and everything else. When you're done with the outer glow, we can go work with the inner glow. Make sure that our color is the same. Once again, messing with the sizing. Do what you got to do to make it look somewhat realistic. Then we're going to do the same exact thing for Princess Leia's laser blaster, as well as Darth Vader's lightsaber. And now we're going to do some even more color correction, kind of like our final treatment for the poster. And what I like to do is turn off all the typography, and then we're going to make a screen grab copy and turn it into its own layer. And to do that, we're going to hit Shift, Option, Command E, and then convert it to a smart object. And then we're going to go up to Filter, Camera Raw. And then once you're in Camera Raw, we're going to start messing around with the effects. For the lighting, I decreased the contrast, increased the shadows, dropped the whites a bit, and then increased the blacks. After that, I went to color, and I just increased the vibrance and the saturation. After that, I went to effects. And then in effects, I dropped the texture a little bit, I dropped the clarity a little bit, and dropped the dehaze just a tad. Then in the color mixing, I just went to the yellow hue and dropped it a little bit. And then after that, I was happy with what I had. And then you can kind of see the before and after. From here, I added a little bit of color balance. Then I added some vibrance. Then I went to a color lookup and ended up using the Fuji Eternal 2500. And from here, I wanted to add a little bit of noise on top of all the layers. So I would hold down the Option key, hit New Layer, and then once your new layer pops up, go ahead and rename it. And then make sure you click on Overlay as your mode, and then fill with Overlay Neutral Color 50% Gray. Now we can convert it to a smart object. And then go up to Filter, Noise, and add a suitable amount. Then one of the last pieces of this puzzle was to add a little bit of a halftone grunge texture. So I went over to texturelabs.org, picked one out, dropped it back in, and then messed with the transparency and used the blending mode soft light. And as you can see, it gives it that old school printed poster effect to kind of tie it all together.